All right, looks like we're live. Welcome to a very impromptu live stream. I'm here with Liberal Sanity Project, and we're going to be discussing, well, I think the proper role of authority and the proper usage of things like peer review and in the academic community to discern truth. And I guess this was inspired initially by, well, I'm not exactly so sure. It's been a while, and I don't really follow JF streams religiously. But I think this is a disagreement between you and Frame Games Radio over the relative veracity of, well, I think it was affirmative action in the creation of loans, right?
Something like that, yeah. JF tried to ascribe blame to a piece of government legislation as the cause of the Great Recession. He'd done this in a prior stream with the guy who set this up between me and him, and I know that that's not true. I'd read the report, well, at least, I mean, Frame Games might know more than I do, but I read this report from the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission that looked at the causes of the recession, and that was what I based my opinion on. And
this was this is what I remember, right? Because Frame Games Radio brought up the fact that he didn't trust this commission because of the fact that he associated these people with the same people who had caused the crisis to begin with. Yeah. And he was of the opinion that we should be skeptical of people who publish these reports. And he said that you could use independent verification to tell whether these reporters were telling the truth, whether they might be biased. And I have to say that I was quite sympathetic to that point of view. I was certainly on FrameGame's side. But I'm not so sure. I don't want to misrepresent your opinion here, but there seemed to be this kind of idea that because it was published, and I don't want to misrepresent you, it seemed the straw man seemed to be that, like, because this was published, it had some kind of authority that we did not really have the means to independently verify this stuff because it came from an academic or government authority. Help me out here if you could.
So I'm not against skepticism of any kind of authority. I have absolutely no problem with that. The difference between me and Frame Games, I think, is that he expected me to independently verify the data, which is something I don't trust myself with because I know I'm not qualified to do it. And that was the crux of our disagreement. If I haven't studied this, I can look up methodologies and stuff, but if I'm not an expert in this field, I wouldn't trust myself to independently say it was the cause of anything. Right? I think it's better to defer to consensus in that kind of a situation.
Well, but I mean, I don't know. Defer to consensus meaning what? I mean, meaning that what the government says in this case?
Well, in part,
that seems to be incredibly, like, I don't know. That seems like it would get you into a really bad place really quickly.
Well, it's not like their work isn't hard to verify. There's been it's been verified outside of government, but that it's government itself saying this is not sufficient enough reason, as far as I'm concerned, to dismiss what they say.
I don't think that's what he was saying. What he was saying is that we could look into the data, understanding that these people might have a reason to be biased because they were essentially working in the employ of the very institutions that we're trying to fact check in this circumstance.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. That's certainly true. But I think that's certainly true of any source.
Okay, but that seems like it would require independent verification to even. I mean, if we understand that this is a this is a problem, right? Then it seems like we would need to have independent verification in order to tackle the problem honestly.
Well, like I said, I'm not qualified to independently verify, which is why I defer to consensus, because if it could be verified from other sources, then that represents that it's been tested by other people.
What would consensus mean in this situation?
Well, as far as I know, unless you're counting the Federal Reserve as an entity of the government, you might be. The cause of the Great Recession was collateralized debt obligations.
Okay, but I mean that's okay, but hold on, that didn't answer my question. Like, we have a reason to believe these institutions are biased, right?
Do we have reason to believe that? I don't think we do. I think we only have that reason.
But let's start there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, you don't think the government institution, like, you don't think the Federal Reserve has a reason to be biased in this circumstance? It seems That seems like it would have to be the case almost, right?
Why would they have a reason to be biased?
Because their own policies could be indicted in the process of examining this.
Okay. Do we have any reason to think that their own policies are?
Oh, okay, but well, yeah, of course we do. I mean, the entire financial system was indicted in this process, wasn't it?
Yeah. So then, who are we going to trust to look at the causes of this recession?
Well, but this gets back to me. So you do see the need for independent verification in this circumstance, right? Like this is the problem. LSP is that like you shift the goalpost. First, it seems like you don't understand why we would even need to question the Federal Reserve. Then you understand why we need to question it, and we're back into the need for independent verification.
So if you are misunderstanding me, I'm not, like I said, I'm not against questioning. I even started this by saying a healthy amount of skepticism is certainly encouraged.
Okay.
I'm not against.
You understand why the Federal Reserve might be biased, right?
Yeah, I understand that the Federal Reserve might be biased, but you have to justify that. You can't just say it's biased.
No, what? Well, hold on. Wait. They have reason to be biased. We can expect that they'll be biased. So you're saying before we even do independent verification, I had to prove the Federal Reserve is biased?
Well, yeah, you're operating under the assumption
that's bullshit.
Okay.
They have reason to be biased. We know that they. Otherwise, all we're going to ever do.
I mean, when
did you ever question authority?
When have I? Well, I don't know.
You don't know, but like it's the thing. Like, when was the last time you questioned authority? Like, when was the last time you went to someone who was like a teacher and said, like, no, you're wrong about that thing?
I don't know. I mean, I can't remember any time I've ever done it.
You never done that, but this is the problem where we're at, right? Like, do you not understand how that's a problem for people in this conversation?
Sure, it could be a problem for people. But if I'm going to question authority, I have to have a reason to question it, right?
But you've never had a reason to question authority?
It's a weird question. It's not like I have
what are you talking about? It's a perfectly legitimate question. You've never had a reason to question authority.
I've answered your question.
No, you haven't.
Okay. Well, not that I can remember. That's what I answered.
You're telling me that you've never had a reason to question authority. I want you to repeat that.
This is like the fourth time I've repeated this. Yeah, I can't think of any time I've actually had to do that.
Okay. So to me, this means that this indicates that you do not have the tools to question authority since you've never in your life done it.
Okay.
Can you imagine how you'd hypothetically question authority if that
if you look at the data
event ever occurred?
Sure. If you look at the data and you come away with a different conclusion than what an authority figure came to. Now
so
you have a
independent verification, right?
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay, so in the hypothetical circumstances where we would question authority, we could use independent verification.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
in order to start that process, would I need to have proof that the authority was bad, or could I just go like, well, I have a reason to believe that they're biased? How would this process start out?
I would imagine you'd start it by asking a series of questions. If you start on the presupposition that they're biased, you're going to go in with your own bias to dismiss anything they say. It's kind of a poisoning the well kind of thing. So you have to. What's that?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Well, I mean, how would you start it then?
I'd say if there's a prima facie reason to believe that an organization is biased, then we can essentially begin an investigation of independent verification, right? If we have any reason to believe that this is the case. The burden of proof essentially is on the person with the authority, not the person who doesn't have any authority, right? Or not on the people who are potentially questioning this authority.
Which is why I wouldn't just trust an authority if they just said things. They have to provide their data, their evidence. Well, I think this is the case with anything. Academia does this too.
Okay, but so that means that, to me, that means that we have reached a sufficient threshold to start questioning the Federal Reserve.
Sure, if you want to question the Federal Reserve, that's fine. Like I said, I'm not against this.
So to me, we are essentially saying that Frame Games was correct in his analysis of this.
I'm not quite sure what specifically.
Well, about the need for independent verification in this circumstance.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not against that. So this is how I started. Start with skepticism. That's fine. I'm against me doing it because I can't trust myself to do it because I know I'm prone to biases and I know I don't have a sufficient understanding of the material.
Okay, but that means that you shouldn't participate in this conversation, essentially, right? You've effectively removed yourself from the conversation. Like,
Why can I not cite experts?
well, because the experts are under. All you're doing essentially is saying that we shouldn't question the experts. You're not really citing them.
I've literally said several times now, feel free to question them.
Well, no, I'm afraid though you really haven't. If you look back to the conversation with Frame Games Radio, you were drawing into question why he should be doing independent verification to begin with. If the debate
No.
if the
I'm sorry,
debate between you and Frame Games Radio is him going, hey, look, the FBI has a reason to be biased, and I looked at the actual raw data and through independent verification came to the conclusion that they were wrong in reporting this, and moreover, not only were they wrong, they had a reason to be wrong. Then essentially I would trust that over just someone repeating back to me what the FBI said any day of the week.
Yeah, so I'm not. I don't have an issue with that, but you have to justify it to me, right? Like if I'm going with this one source over this other, and you're saying this one source is wrong, you have to tell me why it's wrong.
Well, what do you mean? But that's I. Well, again, this conversation was cut short on JF's stream, but he was going over that with you, right? I mean, that this was part of the conversation you guys were having, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't really supposed to be a debate, but yeah, it was. Basically, he was telling me the inner functionings of I'm sorry, not the Federal Reserve, the Community Reinvestment Act, because I'm not as familiar with it as he is, apparently.
Okay, but okay, sorry, but okay, but it just seems like you got into it. So if my understanding was that he looked into it, you hadn't, and you were just there to make sure that he was aware of the fact that the mainstream and government line was the following. Is that my understanding of what was going on?
It's really way more simple than that. I was just there because JF invited me.
Okay.
Like my understanding was Frame Games was going to do some response to me, and I was just going to listen in. But JF sent me a link. I told him initially I wasn't going to be able to because I was at work, but Frame Games wound up being delayed by like an hour, so I had time when I got off.
I mean, I think Frame Games was just. Maybe this is the most abortive live stream of all time. It seemed like you just got involved in a conversation you weren't ready to prosecute at the level that Frame Games was interested in prosecuting it.
Yeah, that's possibly true. I would have no problem admitting that. If he knows more than me, I'd certainly love to hear what he has to say about it. Like I said, I'm not against people questioning any of my sources or any of my statements or any of the facts that I bring. I even encourage that. Check my work.
I did hear one thing from you that I think was how should I put this? I did hear one thing that in the course of the conversation that I felt was correct on their side that you seemed to take offense to, and that was the fact that you described academia as a meritocracy, as being, I don't know if you used the word unbiased, but it seemed to be that you had this idea of academia being this unbiased purveyor of truth.
It's certainly biased. I didn't take offense to that. I thought JF laughing was really more funny than anything else.
Well, why is him laughing at academia being a meritocracy funny if you admit that there are large biases?
Because he's a PhD. Because he had to go to
I'm a PhD.
Okay, because he had to do his own. Well, I assume you had to do a dissertation, right? You had to do your own research paper, and you had to have it peer reviewed by experts in your field, right?
Yeah, that's an incredibly political process.
Well, I'm not in on the process, but from what I can see, it's a process that tests your work, which is why I would call it a meritocracy. Because if your work was shoddy, it would be shot down.
It's heavily political though. This whole process is shot through and through by politics, and
I don't know about it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems. Well, I don't know. Help me out here, right? Because. I hate to like burst the bubble, but it is heavily shot through and through by politics, right?
Okay, you don't think it's in the least bit meritocratic?
Well, there's a component of that, but the problem with meritocracy is once people describe things as a meritocracy, they tend to turn off their brains, and then, well, I don't know. I mean, I think we know where that leads. I mean, you would, if you said the market is a meritocracy, would you agree with that?
Sure, in general, yeah.
Okay, but well, maybe we're using this in different ways. But I always I kind of balk when I hear the market is a meritocracy, because I always think that this is a lazy excuse to push forward the market is always right kind of perspective that you might get from, well, I know, a stereotypical 90s libertarian type, right? And
this is where
to
I'll
me,
break from them. I don't think it's always right, but I do think it tends to be a meritocracy.
okay, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know what meritocracy. I guess to you, meritocracy means there's some component of merit to it.
Yeah, that you have to have some degree of knowledge, expertise, or technical proficiency in what you're doing to succeed in this kind of a field.
Okay, but that doesn't tell you whether it's right or not. I mean, like,
right or wrong are moral questions. I'm just
no. Right, okay, right, when I said right in that sense, I meant that doesn't tell you whether it's correct or not. That's not a moral question.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's not.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't even disagree with that.
Okay, so I don't understand what we're. So,
I can introduce
the meritocracy. You can't say meritocracy. Therefore, peer review beats independent verification, or we don't need to do independent verification.
I don't think I've ever said peer review beats independent verification. I just said you have to justify it when you come to a different conclusion from a consensus.
So I guess what we're saying here is it was a big misunderstanding.
And maybe
something like that.
I messaged Frame Games so we could try and clear it up, and he never responded.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I mean it's well, I guess it's not impossible that it's a big misunderstanding, but you know, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess from my perspective, it seems a lot in my field that people they have this worshipful attitude towards science and the academy, and they don't execute proper skepticism when it comes to the university professors.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, you have students that would never accept raw assertions coming from their high school teachers, coming from their high school science teachers, just bowing down to the most obvious bullshit once it comes from somebody with a PhD in front of their names. But the peer review process is not notably different. I mean, there's slightly more guards when it comes to the peer review process than when it comes to selecting people to teach high school, or when it comes to writing high school textbooks. But it's largely the same thing, and it's rife with politics, just like the creation of high school textbooks is.
Sure.
And I feel that a lot of people, especially on the liberal and progressive side, shut their brains off when it comes to authorities that come from the university system. And that's what I'm really concerned about here. Well, if you're wondering why people like JF and I scoff when we hear the academia described as a meritocracy, is that it seems to me to be not properly describing the bias, the politics, and the massive blindsides that go into the academy as it currently stands.
Right. So it's a trade-off problem. You can either take the blind sides of yourself when you independently verify versus the blind sides of a peer. I don't know how you could trust yourself to know that you're right when you're reviewing something if it hasn't been tested. And that's the benefit of peer review. It's been tested.
No, peer review is not a test. Like, what do you mean? You don't mean like scientifically tested?
No, I don't mean scientifically tested. I mean your work has been reviewed by peers in the field who would understand the data, would understand the methodology, and can review it for any flaws.
Okay, but work that comes out of corporations is reviewed too.
I'm sorry, what?
Work that comes out of corporations. Like, I used to work at a Silicon Valley company, and the findings in the work they came out with there was reviewed from independent parties too.
I don't have a problem with that. Yeah.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that, like, I mean, I don't know. You're aware that, especially in social sciences, we have a huge repetition and replication crisis going on inside these things. Okay, so a lot of stuff got peer reviewed that's not true.
What has been peer reviewed that's not true?
Like tons of stuff. Tons.
Well, I mean, how would you know it's true? It's a replication.
It doesn't. You know, it's not true because we did it again like 3 times and it failed to
Sure.
That's how we know it's not true.
But then it compels you to ask the next question: why was it true in this one sense? Why did it happen?
But this isn't an end of a conversation. It's the beginning of one, right? All peer-reviewed means is that it meets some incredibly minimal qualifications to be considered worthy of scientific consideration. It does not mean that you have a gold star or this is absolutely true with some 95% confidence.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that.
Even as a statistician, something reported at 95% confidence isn't 95% confident. And you should not read it like that.
Well, I'm not saying you do. You start on the idea that you're going to test a hypothesis.
No, I'm saying, yeah, if you were verifying it, right? But I'm saying we've established that you're not in the game of verification. You're in the game of reading this stuff, right?
Yeah. Wait, are we talking about me personally or like peer review boards?
We're talking about people who read peer review papers.
Yeah.
So if you're doing an experiment, you're supposed to verify this. If you're just reading it randomly, you're supposed to read it and have skepticism.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing with this. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so, well, as per usual, I guess I'm just not understanding what was even the contention. It seems that in this conversation, we are quite earnestly looking directly into the need for independent verification when it comes to.
Well, that's where the problem lies, is independent verification. I'm like I said, I don't trust myself to know that what I've verified when I've looked at the data is correct. And I would want it to be. Why not? Because I'm stupid. Because
what skill do the researchers have that you don't?
Well, experience. That's pretty major. Experience looking at.
Maybe not. How do you know? I mean,
I want to know they have a degree. I mean,
okay, but what does that mean?
It means that you've been tested in this field and you've proven that you know what you're talking about.
You haven't proved. No, it means you've gotten past like some institutional hurdles and you knew the right people on the peer review and you wrote it the right way and you flattered the right people who wanted to make sure that their work was recognized in the citation section. That's what getting published means. It means that you've met a certain minimum standard. You haven't proved anything.
Right. So it would be better to meet that minimum standard than to just be a layman and try to dissect that on your own.
But if you were reasonably competent in statistics and you go and look at the raw data for any sociological paper, I would believe that person's raw understanding of statistics better than or very, very nearly to the people who to the result actually published.
Why is that?
Because the people who publish this result only have rudimentary understandings of statistics, and what other skill are we really talking about?
Sure. I mean, if we're talking about statistics in relation to the cause of the recession, or are we just talking abstract?
Well, in the case of the recession, to go back to that example, the recession was the contention there was that there was an institutional bias, and I agree with Frame Game Radio that there did seem to be a huge opportunity for a conflict of interest in that report. And you admitted you could see that, right?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with saying that, which is why I wouldn't
necessarily discount reasonable understanding of statistics comes to the raw data in a report that we have every reason to believe has a conflict of interest in it. And they say that the person who did it was wrong. I'm going to take that criticism very, very seriously.
Sure, and I would encourage you to review their work. I'm not against that. Like I said, I'm not against reviewing authority. I want everybody to review any kind of work anybody does. That's perfectly fine. You just have to justify it.
Well, our justification is that for people like myself and Frame Games Radio, who are, I guess you could call us reactionaries, we believe that the institutions that make up the academy and that make up the government do have a systematic bias. And a lot of these questions we're seeing come up right now are questions that those institutions were not able to answer unbiasedly, and they had every incentive to fudge the numbers on.
Okay, and so you can demonstrate this through review of their work.
Well, that's what Frame Games has done, apparently.
Okay, well, I mean, he didn't do it to me. That's what I was interested in, but he kind of just.
I think your conversation was cut short by JF, but I've been watching Frame Games videos for quite a while, and I have to say that he backs his stuff up.
Sure.
He did a whole review of the disparate impact laws we have on the books. He cites his sources. He did a whole review of the apparatus we have among basically threatening large companies like Starbucks with discrimination lawsuits, and he backs all that up. And so I don't know. I mean, to me, this seems like an incredibly legitimate thing to do. And from what I heard, he had a good case against the Federal Reserve's report.
Well, and the Inquiry Commission. It wasn't just the Federal Reserve.
Sure.
There was two different entities that are generally well regarded.
Well, they're well regarded by people who depend on them. I mean, of course they're well regarded. They're the establishment. They have money. I mean, in the case of the Federal Reserve, they literally print money.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if they weren't well regarded. The question is we have a question about whether the well regarded and powerful people in this country have a bias or are fudging their numbers. And I'm afraid that appealing to the fact that rich and powerful men are well regarded isn't going to get you out of this circumstance. And I think you can see why, right?
What circumstance am I in?
The circumstance of essentially appealing to the authority of the well-regarded and well-to-do-ness of the very people we're trying to question and investigate in our investigations, in our explorations of this data.
Hey, you can bring other data to me. I'm perfectly fine with that. Like I said, that's fine. Just justify it. And I'm still game for frame games to do that.
That last one's the key. What do you mean? You mean show you the data?
Yeah, well, show me the data. Show me where you think the Federal Reserve or the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission got it wrong, and tell me why I should go with this conclusion over their conclusion. And that's basically what I was trying to get with frame games. We didn't get very far into that, but I'm certainly game for having that conversation again if you ever.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't come to this conversation with frame games sources.
Yeah,
I will say this is that
he gave me the dissenting opinion of the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, but then it begs the next question: why do I go with the dissent over the majority?
Well, I think what he was making the case of, and I don't know if this was clear in the original conversation, he was making the case. Well, it was clear to me, but perhaps it wasn't clear to everyone, that if you looked at the dissenting opinions, the data that they cited was much more in evidence than the data that the main commission cited.
I'm sorry, what did you say? I didn't hear that.
I think he was saying that the dissenting position, you could verify that what they were saying was actually true, whereas those arguments of the dissent were never answered by the main commission's report.
Sure, but you'd have to show me how you verify that it's true.
By going to the raw numbers that were reported.
Okay.
Banks report numbers, and you can look into them, right?
Right. So, like
not only that, I mean, you can also smell test things too, right? I mean, that's another thing too. I mean, this is something that I think Frame Games alluded to a little bit, right? I mean, we do have laws on the books regarding talks. I know you discussed this a little bit about the process of approval of loans for minorities versus loans for non-minorities. And so if the report says that there aren't these laws on the books, you can literally go to the laws on the books and without any analysis of numbers, see that this is a misrepresentation or an obfuscation of what's actually going on.
Right, but this is where my disagreement came from, because when I read the Inquiry Commission, they actually went over the amount of loans that could be tied to this particular law, and they found that it was enormously underrepresented in the number of toxic mortgages, which is why I went with their conclusion, because it didn't seem like it was much of a big deal.
What do you mean?
I mean, something like 6% of the bank loans that were toxic or subprime could be tied to the Community Reinvestment Act. So there was no reason to assume it was a cause if it constituted such a enormously small number of the toxic loans.
So okay, but this would have to be taken to independent data, right, to see exactly where the numbers matched up on this question, right?
Yeah.
And to my mind, this would be something that I would want to have independently verified and not through a government oversight committee hired by the government that has a benefit that has an interest in this coming out one way or the other.
Well, I'm curious. You're not an economist, right? Would you trust yourself to independently verify
Yes, I would trust myself to independently verify it because I have a rudimentary understanding of statistics. I can read numbers on a paper. Okay, tell me this. Now, this is to the meat of this. What skill would I have to have, not like degree name, Like, I do have a PhD, but what specific skill would I have to have in order for me to look at this report and verify it? Skill, not degree name, not institutional gold star. What actual skill would I have to be able to do?
It really just comes down to an understanding of how to interpret the data. Like, even if you know how to interpret statistics, what does that get you if you don't know what these certain terms mean or these certain concepts are?
So it would have to come down to a rudimentary understanding of how loans are given in the banking system.
Sure.
Okay, well, I have that.
Okay, well, then you're free to. I'll send you my source as well.
Look, I mean, I'm afraid that this whole live stream was just a mistake on my part. Pardon me, but the thing is just what we're interested in here is calling into question these institutions. And we're perfectly willing to have people come in and defend these institutions. But the game here that we're talking about is independent verification, not the authority told me this, not the well-respected rich man told me this. We're talking about the actual facts and comparing the actual facts to independent verification. The academic opinion and the government opinion really don't come into this because, like I said before, we're largely calling these positions, these authorities into question with what we're doing here.
Yeah, so I'm not against that. I've made it clear I wasn't against that. I sent you a message before we set this up to make it clear I wasn't against that, and you still wanted to do this on live stream.
No, okay. The thing okay, first of all, I think we did come to some conclusions here, and the conclusion is that you don't consider yourself a person that can possibly hold forth on this topic.
Sure,
aside from
just games.
Aside from reading back the report of what other people have written.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. Yeah, that's what I told.
Even when you're pushing forward the FBI authorities' paper, you're not saying, I've read the FBI's paper and I believe it because I independently, it made sense to me. You're saying this is a report, I don't understand it, I lack the capacity to understand it, but the big rich person with a lot of power told me this is true, so believe this. I mean, I don't understand why. I guess I'm going to repeat what Framgate said. If that's all you're adding to the conversation, you're not even really involved in the conversation. We know what the Federal Reserve said. We know what the FBI said. We know what the independent investigator said. We can just download the reports and read it back to us, or read it back to ourselves. If we're not ourselves coming in with judgment and the ability to discern truth from falsehood, then we're not really acting as analysts in this investigation. We're just rubber stamping things that have already been said and we can read on the internet.
Well, yeah, that's the nature of consensus. At some point, you have to accept that truth is truth. Again,
well, no, but that's not the nature of it. See, the thing is this is what I'm talking about, and if I'm boring people in the chat, I apologize. But this is what I'm getting at here, right? Is every now and again I think we're totally aligned, and then we have these little digressions that make me think that we're not totally aligned.
Okay, so what is it?
So the thing is it's like you are not needed to give the FBI or the independent investigator or the Federal Reserve or the Federal Reserve's report to themselves authority. I don't need you to give me. There's not some magical idea of consensus that requires you to validate them. They are what they are. The report has been done. The analysis has been made. Now, right. You as an analyst, as an independent thinker, might be able to provide insight, might be able to provide criticism, might be able to provide validation of what they did. But if you say that I cannot act as an independent thinker inside this field, then I don't understand why you're even involved in the conversation, because there is no magical consensus that they require from you. They have the authority given to them that they already have, and we can read what they've written. And there's no need for any kind of consensus of anything. Consensus it doesn't mean anything, right? Authority, I mean, you could say that they have we trust them. They've been trustworthy in the past. That means something, right? If you have knowledge of their history in the past, maybe you could validate the fact they've been trustworthy in the past. But if you have neither knowledge of their history nor knowledge of how to actually analyze what they're saying, coming forward and reminding us that they're powerful and rich and well-respected because they are powerful and rich does not add anything to an analysis of truth in a given conversation.
So insofar as the analysis of truth as or what I was doing there, this was a debate about whether or not forming an ethnostate is economically feasible or morally viable. And that was what the conversation was. I brought up facts that other people had established to support my arguments. Okay.
Well, no, you weren't making arguments because you've admitted that you don't have the capacity to talk on this topic.
I was making an argument. I was making an argument that it was economically unfeasible. In fact, JF even agreed with my arguments. He just said he didn't care. But my argument was that it was economically unfeasible for reason, and I cited facts, studies, different kinds of authority figures who've looked at this and have come to this conclusion. I never said I was going to make an argument about the viability of these studies.
Wait, what? Are you advancing your own argument, or are you just reading something somebody else has written?
My own argument is that it's economically unviable to make an ethnostate, and I used yes.
Wait, what does this have anything to do with ethnostates?
That was the subject of the debate.
I thought the subject of the debate was like on financial regulations. That's the one I heard.
Okay, so the subject of the debate was the viability, the economic viability, or the moral viability of establishing an ethnostate. I used several different things to support my arguments, and JF contested one of them, which is that the cause of the recession was the Community Reinvestment Act or something like that. So that's what got Framed Games involved, because Framed Games knows more about it than I do.
Okay, but you're referring to a conversation that I had not heard that occurred prior to this one.
Right. So we were talking about this is what started it. There's a whole genesis to this thing. It was an argument about establishing ethnostates.
But you have no argument that you're pushing for when it comes to the actual. You have no argument when it comes to actually describing the nature of the financial regulatory system. All you're doing is rereading things other people have written.
Absolutely. I don't have the epistemological tools to reframe other people's arguments. So all I'm going to do is cite them.
Well, I don't know. I guess for my money, from my money, there can't be a conversation on that point then, right? I guess you're correct. You just ended up in this conversation because of the fact that you were invited on, but you're telling me that you're not. Well, hold on a minute here. So you're not competent to understand or even read the report. You're not competent to analyze the Federal Reserve report on community reinvestment, but then you are competent to make a sweeping generalization about the feasibility of a hypothetical system that no one has ever seen in action.
I don't think there needs to be a competency for something like that.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
debating a fairy tale. What I did was I cited economic realities that I can tie to certain sources who've looked at this. That's what I cited.
Okay, I mean, I don't know. I mean, so you don't need to be an economist to say that the ethnostate, quote unquote, is. I'm not a white nationalist. I don't care. But you agree that you don't need to be an economist to make the statement that you just made, right?
No, I don't think so, generally. I think you can just look at what other economists have said about the nature of immigration or the nature of diversity and make arguments from that.
Well, but then this is the thing, right? Because there's no common consensus on any of these topics.
Well, there is on immigration.
We're going through an argument right now with the alternative hypothesis about the effects of diversity on community cohesion, and I've read like 4 or 5 papers on it, and they're all over the place, man.
Are we talking
Robert all Putnam? Over the place? What?
Are we talking Robert Putnam?
Yeah, we're talking. Well, there's not just Robert Putnam. There's a bunch of authors on this topic.
I'm familiar with some of them. I've read some of their works. What I try to do is get a better understanding of what their works say, and so that I know precisely if they're being misused. So you
understand that they contradict each other and there's disagreement, right?
Yeah, I understand that there's not consensus all the time, but when I cited that the economic effects of immigration and how that increases the supply of labor, that was me citing economic consensus on that.
Wait, no, I don't know where are you getting the fact that this was consensus?
From a series of letters signed to Donald Trump from leading labor economists that said that immigration is a valuable tool for growing the size of the economy.
So you're talking about a politically motivated letter from a group of economists is evidence that there is a consensus across the
I'm sorry, but I thought you were operating on the axiom that everything's politically motivated.
I will. When they're a letter to the sitting president, I think that's politically motivated.
Okay, well,
that is not evident. Was this letter peer reviewed?
I don't think letters are peer reviewed.
Okay, well, there we go. I mean, not that I believe in that, but I mean, this immediately sets up alarm bells to me, right? A letter to the president about how, from a group of economists who like immigration, saying that all of the economists have their back. I mean,
well, here's I can give you another argument.
Like we can smell test this, right?
Well, are we pretending academic consensus isn't a thing?
I think academic consensus is a thing and feels like, well, physics. Well, it depends. What do you mean by academic consensus? You mean just like that a lot of experts agree on one thing?
More or less, yeah.
Here's the thing I'll say. I need to elaborate on this. Academic consensuses naturally develop, but they do not correlate with certainty over scientific propositions. For instance, if you went back 100 years ago, there would be an academic consensus that African Americans were less intelligent than white people. And that would be as clear as the academic consensus now, probably even more solid than today when you have people having the academic consensus that there is no significant difference in intelligence, even though that's contested in its consensus. Now, the presence of a consensus inside an academic field does not indicate that that is necessarily certain. Fields naturally develop consensuses because it behooves them, for the purposes of publication, to present the field as if it has actual learnings. If people are just all over the place with their findings, the field starts looking really, really worthless, right?
Sure, but I wasn't citing things where it's generally contested. Insofar, well, I'll give you another example: immigration and crime. There are metadatas, which is just a collection of studies that aggregates their findings to establish what the truth is from all these different things that have looked at a certain thing, right? A certain data set, and is insofar as I don't know. I don't want to say about economics, but I know insofar as immigration and crime goes, the consensus is that immigration is associated with lower rates of crime. That immigrants commit less crime.
But here's the thing: if I did a meta-analysis in 1922 of all the studies that had been published on the various differences in racial intelligence, what do you think that meta-analysis would come up with in 1922?
It would come up. I don't know. It would probably come up with the fact that blacks are subhuman and less intelligent and all that stuff.
Because there was a systematic, politically motivated bias in that direction. And the thing is, given the fact that we know that sociologists have systematic left-wing biases, we need to actually be more careful when we survey papers that are published inside a field that we know has a left-wing bias, and this use the consensus of overall papers to say that this is certain. A lot, like this is the thing. I need to communicate this to people who might be listening, although I probably won't keep this video up since apparently there's no real point to it in the abstract. I thought there might be, but just to give this thing, like a bunch of studies done at low confidence does not come together to make a high confidence study. It doesn't. Sure. And this is the thing, right? Like if the entire field is uncertain, and we know because of the fact that the field has to present itself as certain consensuses are going to be developed at the upper echelon, and then those consensuses are going to actually determine what gets published in the future so that the field can present itself as being more confident so that it gets more funding, right? And so you can't just bring together low confidence studies. Like, for instance, like you can't just like merge together 20 sociological reports that say that give this result and say that, okay, because we have 20 of them, that's now comparable to a physics study where we can see consistently electrons behaving in this way.
Right.
It's not the same thing. You can't get that confidence.
Right. And this is a problem to take up with the experts in that field and not me, who is not an expert in that field. And so far as being a layman goes, all I can do is recite what other people smarter than me have said.
So how would you detect institutional bias if it did occur in the academy? Like, let's say, for instance, that you were a liberal in the 1920s. You don't believe it. Maybe you shouldn't use the race intelligence thing, right? But I don't know. Let's take any other thing, right? That that might be believed in the 1920s that would be untrue. Well, let's go back even to the 1890s or 1860s and go, how would you disprove, or I think let's maybe a more modern example. Let's say you're in the Soviet Union and you're trying to disprove Lysenkoism, right? Like
Sure.
how would you motivate a questioning of these authorities when everyone with a PhD is essentially on board with the government line?
Just testing it.
Well, test. What do you mean testing it? Like
For you develop a hypothesis and you test it. Although I don't know that you can develop a hypothesis.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is not a testable hypothesis.
Yeah, we're referring to like sociology when it comes to like black-white IQ gap. I don't know about.
Even sociological results for IQ gap. I don't know about modern genetic experiments, but most of this stuff, both in the past and in the present, has not been tests. They have been analysis of data collected through other means, either through IQ testing or through the process of surveys or through post hoc analysis of performance results in other regards, right? This is not like the chemistry experiment. This is stuff that it's hard to get data. The data has to be massively interpreted, and the people who control the publications aren't going to publish you.
Wait, the people who control the public, why would they not publish you? Yeah,
because you undermine their authority.
Okay, but consensus changes all the time. Somebody had to undermine somebody's authority at some point.
And that's what I'm asking you, right? How does the consensus change start?
Well, insofar, I mean, if you want to go with just examining data, you start by developing a hypothesis and you test it in some way or another. Now, I understand
you're not answering in the way I understand how this.
I'm not answering the way you want. I'm sorry, but I don't know.
No, you're not even answering the question I asked. I'm saying that what I'm getting at is it would start with outside people doing an analysis and coming to conclusions about the data that they're seeing and proposing alternative theories outside of the purview of the authorities that hand out the gold stars and the degrees. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
Okay, so then you should fully understand why people like myself are so entirely skeptical when it comes to treating as consensus these very, very low confident fields that are incredibly biased towards one political direction, right?
Sure. I mean, I don't accept that they're biased, but sure.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I think this is we've kind of run this conversation out. But I think you see the reason why we're skeptical of consensus-driven science, and we want numbers-driven science, not consensus-driven science. We want results-driven science, not consensus-driven science.
Like I said, I'm not against any of that.
And since we're in the business of questioning the orthodoxy on this matter, we're not interested in just revalidating the opinions of people with PhDs, even though I do have a PhD.
Not against that either. If you want to move consensus, by all means, try.
Okay, well, I think then this was just a mistaken communication between you and Frame Games Radio, and perhaps it can be rectified in the future. But I don't know. Obviously, probably not on JF's channel since I think we're both banned.
You're banned? Why are you banned?
Oh, I think I got into an argument about JF because he said that I was, what was it? I think he said I was an accidental white nationalist, and I thought that was really stupid. And then he got really angry at me.
I watched that. You made a whole stream about how you were critical of blood sports for that reason, because it's no nuance.
Well, it's basically just labels but I have to say I really have become a fan of Frame Games Radio because of his meticulous examination of these topics from someone who knows the ins and outs of them. And I think that I would really like to have him on to figure out what's going on in this dimension.
I encourage it. I'd never heard of him until JF brought him up, so I'll check him out.
I don't know, man. I think, a lot of this stuff, at least from the reactionary side, I think what we're dealing with right now is that we can't seem to get into debates against actual people. We only come up against institutional force. And so either we have data, and I think that the data supports the reactionary propositions generally, both on a variety of questions. I won't go into the specific ones. Uh, and the thing is I want an actual debate over the actual numbers, and I don't want to hear about how this gold star authority or how many PhDs are on this side. I just want to see the facts sort of laid bare. And in the same regards, when it comes to debate over moral systems, I don't. What seems to be also an operation is that the progressive liberal side, they're essentially just trying to claim moral authority by remaining dominant in the media and in academia. And they're not actually entertaining their moral opponents. They're just trying to use the force of the institution to grant them power.
I don't know if you watched it, but why don't you tell me what way there is to entertain the moral proposition of an ethnostate, right? That it's moral to establish ethnostates.
I don't think it's immoral to establish ethnostates. I think it's impractical in many regards. I mean, Israel's an ethnostate. Is Israel immoral?
No, well, maybe.
Well, maybe. Well, you tell me, right? I mean, you're the one who has a huge opinion. I'm more or less neutral. I think ethnostates in a lot of these Richard Spencer states they're pie in the sky. They're never going to happen. And I think Richard Spencer personally, I really dislike him. But you tell me, you're the one who is definitely against ethnostates. What's wrong with Israel?
Nothing right now, other than myriad.
So ethnostates can be ethical then,
right? But I don't think there's anything wrong with Israel because it's an ethnostate. Like it could have.
Okay. Then Japan also isn't immoral.
Well, no, I wouldn't consider Japan immoral. There's a bit of a difference between.
Okay, we're listing off ethnostates here that you're agreeing that aren't immoral.
Off until you let me explain what the difference is. Mm-hmm. Like I can't look at the previous actions insofar as the British Mandate goes and determine whether that's moral or ethical through the lens of morals and ethics from today. Right? What is ethical and moral today is not the same as what is ethical and moral yesterday. I don't believe that there's such thing as an objective morality. So is Israel unethical for being an ethnostate? Probably not. It's already said and done. It's shitty for the Palestinians who are living there, but there's not much else.
So you're revalidating that it's not unethical to be an ethnostate.
Yeah, it's not. Well, it's not unethical to be an ethnostate if you're already an ethnostate. But I think if you're trying to actively push the world into being ethnically homogenous through immigration policy or through or deportation,
I don't understand how ethnostates push the world to being homogenous. In my mind, almost every alt-writer that I've ever talked to says that ethnostates are the way of keeping the world more diverse overall, by making sure that we have a diversity of different cultures that exist independently, rather than one big mishmash of everything together and nothing in particular.
Right. So I think even if you had one big mishmash, you'd still have a diversity of cultures. We have a big
okay, but that's not the question I answer. So you agree that that's not the argument that ethnostates, people who promote ethnostates, make, right?
I'm not so sure of that. No, my understanding with most ethnostaters,
an ethnostate is the first step to homogenize the world's races. Is there an alt-writer who says that? Can I get a quote
all races? No, I don't know if there's an ethnostater that says that. It's usually
so we've both been talking to the alt-right for a pretty long time.
Cutting me off a lot. I never get to finish the sentence.
Go ahead.
The way I see it is framed consistently is it's in the name of protecting culture or heritage or something like that.
But that's not what you said before. You said that it was a pathway. Well, sorry, when you pause, I think you're done. Are you done?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, but that's not what you said. You said that the ethnostate was the first step to homogenizing the earth. And I don't see that either in ethnostates that we have currently or in even the hypothetical ethnostates that someone like Richard Spencer and Millennial Woes talks about.
Sure.
Okay, so that accusation was not true.
Sure.
Okay. So I still haven't seen what your moral disagreement. So you think that current ethnostates are perfectly fine, and if ethnostates happen to come into existence in the future, then that would be perfectly fine too. So I guess you're in the same position that I am in, that while I don't support violence for the creation of an ethnostate, there's nothing implicitly unethical about an ethnostate, right?
Right. Not implicitly, or I'm sorry.
Or I should say inherently. Sorry, inherently.
Well,
There's
not
nothing inherent.
yeah. There's nothing really inherently unethical about it. I don't think I would say that. I would say that though, the unethical part comes when you start structuring it by, when you start structuring people's rights by their ethnicity, which is to say, like, you're allowed in if you're white, but you're not allowed in if you're black, sort of thing.
Well, Israel does that.
Well, I don't
Japan
support it.
does that.
Well, what do you want? I don't support it then.
You just told me you didn't. It wasn't unethical.
Well, I think I said they're happenstance ethnostates. They're already created as ethnostates.
Okay, so come on. I mean, do you understand why this doesn't fly with people? I mean, I'm not even someone who supports an ethnostate, but
what
like
your actual contention is. I've made my points clear in the JF debate, and I encourage you to watch it.
you have not made clear in this debate any moral critique of ethnostates.
Right. My moral critique was that ethnicity doesn't actually
claim
matter.
something is immoral, and then you validate it when Israel and Japan do it.
Right.
Because you don't want to condemn Israel and Japan.
Right. Because through the lens of today's today's ethics, I said it wasn't really an issue because they're already ethnostates. It's not. You're not going to undo Israel in the name. Right? You can't undo Israel.
Yeah, you'll undo Israel if you have an open immigration policy into Israel. I can guarantee you that.
Right. But nobody's advocating for an open immigration policy. It's not just.
I wonder why.
Okay, well, we're not. Let me introduce some nuance into this. It's not one or the other. We can have a controlled immigration policy that doesn't just accept people on the basis of their ethnicity.
Why not? I mean, Israel does do that.
Okay, why? Well, do you want to do it like Israel?
I don't know. I'm open to suggestions. I don't see anything immoral about doing what Israel
Justify
is doing.
it. Well, why would we do it? What benefits do we get out of it?
Because there are benefits for having common culture.
Okay.
As Israel itself believes, obviously, by its own immigration policy.
And what are the benefits?
As Japan believes by its own immigration policy.
Well, we also get benefits.
China agrees by its own immigration policy.
And I guess you would say America too. Nobody's saying this is the same bullshit JF tried to do, where he tried to frame.
This isn't bullshit, I assure you. And just address my arguments. And address JF.
Finish the sentence. Well, I'm saying is this.
Well, actually, I was talking and you cut in on me, but okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, I apologize for cutting in on you. What I'm saying is that if you're going to frame the creation or maintaining the maintenance of an ethnostate on the basis of, well, I have an immigration policy and I get to decide who comes in, well, then congratulations, every state's basically an ethnostate. But that's not the way we generally understand ethnostates.
No, not on that basis. The European and America aren't ethnostates because they make no ethnic distinction. That's the difference.
Right, which is what my point is. If you're going to make an ethnic distinction, try to justify it to me, right? Tell me why you want to make an ethnic distinction. Your argument was that it was valuable to have the same race. Okay, why?
No. I did not say that manifestly. I said it was valuable to have the same culture.
I'm sorry, culture. You're right. Okay. I meant to say culture.
And you know, I have an open mind to this. I'm a person that usually functions more on faith and religion than I do on culture, and certainly more than on race, because I don't necessarily believe that that's a big. I don't think that's the real hinge point of our disagreements, but that's neither here nor there. But what it looks like to me is that many states do this one thing. Namely, use ethnicity as a boundary, as a condition for immigration. Except some countries, specifically almost all of the ones that are either European or part of the European diaspora, don't have this particular type of immigration policy. Yeah. Now, I don't see what's so wrong for being in one of the European or European diaspora countries and saying, hey, why don't we try doing what the Asians are doing? Or why don't we try doing what the Israelis are doing? To me, there's nothing morally wrong with doing that. And as a matter of fact, if you're not asking that question, if you're not asking if your immigration policy is hurting your country at this stage, I think you're being irresponsible. Now, I'm not saying that has to come to any particular conclusion, but the idea that we're going to portray an immigration policy that's done the way, well, I think the majority of countries in this world do their immigration policy, portraying that as some kind of weird, inherently unethical thing is bizarre to me.
Well, the reason for doing so determines its ethics, right? If it's really just about liking white people and hating brown people, that would be unethical, right? You're picking some arbitrary characteristic for which to discriminate on.
But how do you? This is the problem, Ellis. I don't know if I should call you LSP or not. It sounds like an Adventure Time character.
Pick your name, it's fine.
But this is the thing. Like when you're talking about policies that are in million-person democracies, there's never going to be only one reason for doing things. There wasn't just one reason for the Civil War. There wasn't just one reason for World War II. There wasn't just one reason for anything that a million-person strong democracy does.
Sure.
And so, if you look at the immigration policy of China or Japan or Israel or any of these countries, I'm sure that some people in that country just hate Koreans, and that's the reason why they prefer Japanese over Koreans, or they just hate Palestinians. That's always going to be a thing, right? But there are many reasons to do this immigration policy, and frankly, to tell you the truth, talking to a lot of alt-righters, I don't naturally see hate. Well, some people I see just this endemic hate coming out of them, but in a lot of cases, all I see is group loyalty. And to my mind, that means that we have to entertain what they're asking for in good faith. And when we entertain that in good faith, we have to go back to the examples we already see worldwide.
So I'm not against that. I tried to entertain in good faith what JF's propositions were, but I didn't quite understand why. Like, I kept pointing out that there's an arbitrary nature to it, that you could find loyalty in group identity insofar as your national identity or your civic identity goes. And JF really doesn't seem to disagree with this. He just prefers race. And I just want that justified.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you can in a multicultural society, though. That's sort of up for question, right?
Well, why can't we all see ourselves as Americans?
What does it mean to be an American?
A citizen of the United States.
Okay, but does that confer any values? Are there some citizens of the United States that are more American than others? Or is the person who just came from the Congo as American as I am?
I would, if he's a citizen, sure.
So there are no values
because we
associate with it.
Well, sure. We coalesce around the value of civic identity, that we have a vested interest in each other as neighbors.
That seems like it's entirely self-referential. If every person in the world could instantly be equally as American as I am, then there is no value that America can stand for in its nominal identity.
I reject that there's any kind of a unified value that being an American already entails. You find America.
It's meaningless. If there's no unified values that all Americans have in common,
well, do you think?
Why am I more associated? Hold on, let me finish my sentence.
Sorry.
If there is no unified moral value that comes with being an American, then why should I feel more association with my American person who lives next door, who worships a different religion, who doesn't like liberty, who has a totally different way of constructing his sexuality than, say, a Catholic in Poland? If there is no common morality, there'll be no common identity. And that is one of the reasons why you're never going to have a civic identity in the way that you're constructing it, at least in this conversation. No, I don't think that means that race is the way to go. I want to make that very clear. I don't think that means race is the way to go, but it means that multiculturalism isn't the way to go.
Right. So I don't disagree with this. I can entertain these arguments. My point was that race is a proxy for whatever the actual issue is. You brought up a Catholic in Poland, so I'm going to bet that you probably have more value in Catholics than you do in whites.
No, I have a vested interest in common values. That's
with Catholics.
Maybe they're. And Catholicism is not all-encompassing on values. It constrains a lot of them, to be sure. You can't be, in my opinion, you can't be a Catholic and be for abortion. Otherwise, that means you're not a real Catholic. But at the same time, there could be other values that would be American. I'll give you a classic example would be if you went back 60 years ago to the 40s or 50s, right? American Catholics would be gung-ho on free speech and on free enterprise and on freedom of expression and on the American dream, right? And on patriotism and Uncle Sam and all of this Americana that we've built up over the last 200 years of being a country and being basically dominated by Anglo-Protestant culture, right? That would be a point in Catholic identity in America in the 1950s that wouldn't be a point of identity for a Catholic living, say, for instance, in Romania or in Bulgaria, although I think Bulgarians are mostly Orthodox. So there are values, and if you say that the American way is this, this, and this, right? Then maybe being an American can be part of my identity. So I have American values and I have my Catholic values, and they're together. That's fine. But what you were proposing in your multicultural example, where anybody in the world could be as American as I am, the second they are handed a green card, then that identity has become functionally meaningless, because there's no way that any collective body of people in the world will ever have a different set of values that differentiates themselves from the body of Americans that couldn't essentially be immediately undone by the flick of a switch on the immigration policy of this country. And that's the main problem with multiculturalism in creating any kind of cohesive identity.
Okay, so you more or less seem to be agreeing with me that insofar as these values go, it's really just a proxy for whatever actual mainstream to you values that you want, right? So you pick your value, and with Catholicism, and you basically seem to agree that Catholics worldwide don't necessarily think the same, and you have an idea of what a true Catholic is, which is to say that if you got a Catholic who believes in abortion,
no,
by
that's not true.
I
don't decide what a Catholic is. No,
I'm reciting your own words. You said
your misunderstanding what actually is going on, and you're fastening on a turn of phrase I used in place. That's not how this actually works. The doctrine of the Catholic Church defines who is a Catholic and who is not, and you can quite clearly see outlined in the Catholic Catechism that support publicly for an abortion of the procurement of an abortion as grounds for automatic excommunication, and that is what defines explicitly in no uncertain terms what it means to be a Catholic.
Okay, and this is the definition you accept then?
This is the definition that is held by the institution that holds the identity that we're talking about.
So why couldn't you accept this for what it means to be an American too?
Because, but you said that there would be no distinction based on values for who would be an American.
Yeah, because I don't think any American has a unified value, a set of value. Obviously, we all disagree.
We literally don't see that. Okay, you got to see how this works, right? Like, this is a really simple thing. If we have a set of people and they all have the same values, I can go to those people and go like, okay, these people have my back when it comes to supporting these values. That's fine. Like, I understand that. It can be national, it can be international. It doesn't even have to be the same culture or race, right? I would expect to have the same values more or less coming from Nigerian Catholics, even though they're a massively different culture than my own that I come from, right? But if we're saying that this group of people has no describable values in common, there is no point in me identifying with that group of people.
Well, then why don't
there never could be a value system that you could use to define it on average or in aggregate.
So then why don't you tell me, is there a value you would describe as uniquely American? Like, how do we reconcile?
There was. I don't know if there's any more.
What was it?
Changed. Well, before being an American meant essentially in the 50s, for instance, you weren't an American unless you embraced explicit elements of Anglo culture. And a lot of Catholics, and I'm saying this in the Catholic immigration to this country, I'm not a neocon. I don't want to say conservative, but I'm not a neocon. I'm not a brain-dead neocon here. I believe very sincerely that the immigration of Catholics into this country, it morphed and in many ways degraded the American culture that existed here when it was a pure Protestant state. But it used to be in this country that if you do not, as a Catholic or as an Italian or as a Russian or as, well, less so a Jew, but same sort of deal, if you did not embrace the Protestant ethos, the Protestant way of speaking, the Protestant way of viewing the world in terms of hard work and patriotism and primary loyalty being that of the country and not that of the extended Christendom, then you are not fully American in the same way. And you look at a lot of Americans during this time, like William F. Buckley, you can tell that they literally practice talking like Protestants. You hear William F. Buckley's voice. He literally practiced talking like a Protestant to get that type of voice.
Okay, so I think you pushed the problem back then. What is it, Anglo? What you described it as Anglo culture, right? It's uniquely Protestant in the way of speaking. What does that even mean?
I described that's how it used to be. That's not how it is anymore.
Well, okay, what is that? Well, we can go with how it used to be. What does that even mean, though? What is Anglo culture and
I don't know. You asked the question.
Way of speaking.
So,
huh?
I said you asked the question, so you can tell me.
Well, I don't think there is such a thing. I mean, I think there is generally a shared culture that people have. I don't know how to describe it. Beyond I know it when I see it. I can describe you as American when what?
Maybe I can help you out here. This
Sure.
is what I'm saying, and I think what you were trying to react to. So I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but perhaps I can get us back on track. My statement is this. I don't know. I think America is at a crossroads deciding what it means to be an American. One option is to go back and try to resituate America in for lack of a better word, white American culture that's basically some modification of Anglo culture cross-mutated with few other a few other Eastern European and Catholic countries and some amount of African American culture. That's one direction. The other direction that was proposed in this very conversation was that America ceases to be a category that has any cultural or moral distinction to it. Now, this is my statement. I don't know where we're going to go. I don't know what the decision is going to be, but I can tell you this for sure. If you make America a contentless word, meaning that if I say someone is an American, I can tell you nothing about their morals, their cultural values, the kind of food they eat, the kind of colors they wear when they're feeling patriotic. If I cannot say anything about the word American, it will cease to have any meaning and will cease to be of any use to people in an actual conversation. And nobody will identify as an American after that.
Right. So I actually don't have a problem with, well, that you can identify as an American after that. I'll take the second direction, right?
Where you don't have a problem with it, or you think you can?
No, that I don't have a problem. If you go with where America ceases to have a cultural distinction, I'm not uncomfortable with that because I don't want to be, I don't want my identity to be centered around what other people think an American is. I want my identity to be whatever I want it to be.
Well, no, I mean, I think this, I don't have a problem with X. I don't have a problem with Y. This is not. This is wrong. Look, I don't have a problem. Like you can do that. You can tell me that American means anything, but if you do that, then I'll cease to identify as an American because it will cease to contain meaning for me.
Well, it has meaning in terms of citizenship. It has meaning in terms of devotion, neighborly devotion, right? We have a common.
Are you saying that non-Americans are neighborly devoted?
Oh, of course they do. They're just
okay. So that's not actually a distinction.
It's not uniquely American. They can be neighborly devoted to their own neighbors, but they're not American neighbors. My identity is my identity can be civic. Like there's no reason it has to be restrictive to
most people in America. This country is like it's enormous, right? It's as big as a small continent is.
Yeah.
Like, America has to mean something, or it will not. America has to actually be. This quality is more prominent in Americans. This quality, on average, is attached to Americans. If you do not have a quality like that, nobody is going to use the word American.
Okay, so what quality do you think it is? Well, I guess I should ask what quality you think it should be, because we're talking in a normative sense, right? If you're not against well, you said you're not against the idea of making an ethno-state. So what quality would that entail that you don't already have, or you couldn't already have if you were multicultural?
What are you talking about? There's lots of stuff you couldn't have if you're multicultural. I mean, first of all, even if you are multicultural, you're still ruled by a government, right? So the government is going to be making moral pronouncements. And those moral pronouncements are going to come from some culture sensibility.
Sure. Such is the nature of law.
Someone is going to rule over us, right?
Well, that's not exclusive to. I mean, you can have the same problem in a white-only state. This is what I told JF. Not everybody in a white-only state is going to agree with each other. So if you don't,
but there will be more.
If your only shared value is just your white identity, there isn't much else.
We're not talking about race. We're talking about culture and moral values here.
Right, but race is.
We're not going to get anywhere if we keep on segueing it back to a conversation that we're not having. You're not talking to JF. You're not talking to a white nationalist. You're not talking to somebody who wants to create a white ethno state. The statement simply was this, is that people are going to seek communities of cultural consensus because they need to have reciprocation. They need to have an understanding that they can expect a moral response from a community that they interact with. And at the end of the day, that's going to be some consensus is going to have to be reached morally in society. If that does not occur, people will start splitting off from the identity. Now, what you're describing in the word American, under the multicultural sense, is a signifier that is fundamentally empty of any kind of distinction whatsoever. And that's, I'm just telling you, I'm not making a normative statement. I'm not making an imperative statement. I'm making a predictive one. If you shifted that definition, nobody will follow it.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, and so you don't see a problem with that? I mean, this is the reaction. The seeing that barrier on the road is the reason why people are talking about these crazy ideas like ethno-states.
To do some kind of internal identity crisis? Is that what you're saying?
What? Who's a turn identity crisis?
No,
No, because they see that they see.
identity
I
crisis.
predicted a problem down the road, and I'm not the only one who predicts this problem down the road.
Wait, I'm sorry. What is the problem down the road? Is that people are going to turn to ethnostates because they have no.
The problem down the road is that if you have a label that can mean anything, it means nothing. That's the problem. And if America means any value, any possible value from anywhere in the world, then that label and that symbol now means nothing. The only thing it does mean is that you're owed a certain amount of money by the state, and you get a certain color passport that lets you go different places. That's the only thing it will mean.
Right. So I don't think most people concern themselves with this kind of thought. I think most people are just people who struggle to survive uninterrupted from molestation from other people or the government. And I think that is something of a unified American value, is that people like to just mind their business.
Well, that's not that won't be if you import people from North Korea or China.
Why? Why can't they adopt that value?
Well, why would they? Why wouldn't they just keep their old values? You're saying that
why would they come here if they want to just keep their old values?
Because they get more money when they're here, because they get more privileges from their passport here, because they have more institutional opportunities here. The reason why, I mean, I don't want to sound mercenary here, LSP, but the reason why most people come here is because they have more opportunity economically. They don't come here to change their values.
Well, I don't think they come here to change our values either.
Well, no, but there are 6 or 7 billion people in the world, and there are 300 million people in America. So if you have an enormous number of people, like for instance, if everybody from Africa who wanted to come to America, like they did a study, and I can't remember, it was some enormous percentage of Africans wanted to come to America. If all of those people came to America, then American values would overnight turn into African values, because the native-born population would be a small minority of the people who were actually there.
We've come full circle again, because I don't even know what American values even means.
I'm talking about classic American values.
The Anglo values in the 1950s. What does that mean?
Pardon me, excuse me there. Okay, so I had to wind the conversation down.
Okay, sorry about
that. Okay, like, can I ask something though? Like, I don't know what American values mean. When I say American values, when I talk about it, I mean the ones that we used to have in like the 50s and 60s. Like, obviously now, and obviously under your conception, they don't mean anything, right? But if you imported all of Africa's population, the soil itself would not impart to them the values of leave everyone alone that you seem to prize in your own statement.
So the way I see it is, well, do you want to wind it down, or you want me to give a response?
I guess just give a final response. And we kind of got off the topic, and I probably won't keep this video up, but just give a final. Again, I just was not prepared for this conversation, and it was not very well planned on my part, so I apologize.
Well, I think
thank you for entertaining this conversation, LSP. I think once again we're having frustration. The core frustration I have, and I'll say my piece before I log off. The core frustration I have is that we're dealing with this idea of magical words and magical soil. I don't care about the word American. I don't, it doesn't mean anything to me. What I care about is a cultural community of values that carry us forward into the future. Now, if we rob the word American of any meaning that it would have historically and as it relates to a value community, then it will cease to become meaningful for me. And if you import all of Africa into America, you're probably going to get a lot more of the results you see in Africa. There's nothing about the soil in America itself that is going to magically transform them to have the kind of perspectives that we see currently in America. And I think you're going to see a massive change in the overall behavior of the population, regardless of what anything is true, regardless of what is true biologically, or perhaps even on these sociological studies that we have concerning immigration.
So the way I see it is, culture is this extension of environment. It's you're right. The soil's not going to magically part with them. That's not how it happens. But I think culture changes just by exposure to other people, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think if they come here, we're going to turn into Africa. I think we're just going to change as America, which isn't really frightening to me. I don't see any benefit in going back to 1950s.
So if 500 million Africans came here and essentially made this a majority African country, you don't think that we would become more African in nature?
I don't even know what that means. You think Africa doesn't share a unified culture, right? These are vastly different people. I mean, the people, Africans of Somalia,
They're vastly
very different from the
people,
Africans
but
of
they have
Nigeria.
commonalities.
Well, then tell me what the commonalities are, and tell me why we can't. Well, I mean, we're supposed to be closing, so I will say I don't see any reason we can't impart the culture.
I think you're saying that you don't know what Africa is, you don't know what America is. I think you know what I'm saying. I think you can see the statistical effect, the projection I'm making. I feel like I'm not trying to accuse you of dishonesty, but to me it seems like this. I don't know what American values are. I don't know what African culture looks like. I don't see any commonality in any African cultures. I feel like it's an attempt to avoid the central question and the force of the argument that I'm putting here.
Well, I apologize if that's your conclusion, but I asked you earlier what those values meant, and you basically said you can't tell me what they are today, just that in the 1950s they were distinctly Anglo and Protestant. So I don't think it's a tough question, and I hope you sympathize with the fact that it's a tough question.
I don't think that you can't see what I'm saying. Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you can't see what I'm saying, but I have a hard time believing that you can't see what I'm saying. I have a hard time believing that you can't see commonality in European cultures and commonality in African cultures. Heck, Africans can see commonality in African cultures. There was Pan-African movements all throughout the 20th century. So the idea that we can't see commonality in these broad groups and tendencies in these broad groups strikes me as I just don't understand how other people can't see it. But you're right, we have to close. I really apologize to my viewers for this being such a disorganized live stream. If people want the link, I'll send it to them, but probably I won't leave this up for very long. LSB, thanks for being such a good sport. I know I was a little bit irritable today. I've been traveling, but hopefully we came to some kind of conclusions on something. Thanks for putting up with this impromptu live stream. Have a good day, okay?